got a motion for the January sitting of Tynwald, and it's about funding of infrastructure projects. What's the thinking behind it? What's wrong with the current model of funding for these projects?
For projects, general projects and infrastructure as a whole. Well, if you look back, I mean, we in the years of plenty, we certainly had loads of money to do the big things, and we did them, even though on occasions perhaps they were a little bit more expensive than we might have wanted. But looking forward and comparing us to other jurisdictions and local authorities, we seem to be slipping back somewhat. Of our reserves, we still declare we have significant reserves, but if you analyse those, they are taken up in the main by the National Insurance Fund, which has an absolute commitment. So our reserves are limited, and yet going forward into the future, there's all sorts of things that the Isle of Man has got to do to improve and prepare for a better future. And I question whether that we're embracing new financial opportunities or financing methodologies. And if you look at other areas, I think we are certainly slipping behind. So the intention in this motion is to enable Tynwald to have the opportunity to simply look at what's available, collect those thoughts into a report and submit it to Tynwald, so it becomes effectively a resource for Tynwald. It isn't intended to criticise government or to be too specific. It's supposed to be, or hopefully, if it's agreed, the Select Committee approaches it from a sort of a generic standpoint, that here is a document which shows what can be done, given that we may need to do A, B or C in terms of an infrastructure project or a private sector public project or whatever. And also it'll be a matter of saying, okay, if we are going to put forward as a select committee, if it's appointed, a number of options for future administrations and this administration to consider, then we'll also want to ask ourselves, well, is our legislation in the right place and is it fit for purpose? So that's in summary the intention behind the motion.
Now, when you say possibly private projects or government projects, would you be talking about, or would you be focusing on government lending the money?
I mean, recently for example, we had a presentation in the Burrell Suite to members looking at potential projects for the tourism sector, for example. And that was one of the things that stirred me up to put this motion forward, because it seemed to me that our thinking in terms of financial support was pretty dated. We were still talking about grants and loans and approaching the banks. Well, the banking world has changed completely. Are we still in a position to offer grants and loans in the way that we were? And I think that there's a question mark over all of those points. And so it led me to say, okay, well, if these areas are difficult, what are the opportunities that are out there? And when you look at what other, not necessarily other jurisdictions, but local authorities are doing to re-enable, to revitalise their towns and other major projects, that you think to yourselves, well, we're slipping here and we need to think a little bit differently.
Now, almost inevitably, not always the case with government, but almost inevitably, money that's borrowed has to be paid back at some point. We've seen from previous scenarios in the Isle of Man that there are times when that hasn't happened. For instance, the building of the hospital, there was money taken out of the one of the NI fund, wasn't it?
Well, yes, and also we've recently seen Treasury write off a loan with regard to the MU, and I supported that move, by the way. But I don't want you to get the impression here that the intention of my motion is to concern itself with how taxpayers' funds are paid out. It isn't necessarily that at all. It's how government can work with developers and infrastructure projects in a way that, as it were, allows 1 and 1 to end up equaling 4, for example, rather than just simply 2. There are opportunities there, and we should at least consider them. It might well be that if Tynwald, in its wisdom, decides it wants a select committee, and the committee then reports, and we haven't given ourselves a great deal of time. We need to get on with this, because I'm asking for the report to come back to Tynwald by May. That Tynwald may subsequently decide it simply wants to accept the report or not act upon it. But I think we need to exercise our minds. What's out there? What can we do? How can that benefit us in the Isle of Man?